Hey, welcome to the Star Wars Unlearned podcast. My name is Josiah Shuett, and I'm joined by Nathan Hawley. What we're doing is we are looking at Star Wars through the perspective of its creator. So we're turning off our fan brains and really just trying to uncover the story that Lucas is trying to tell. This is episode 10 in our series on the Phantom Menace, where we explore the filmmaking, the history, the mythology, and everything else that Lucas and his team used to bring this first chapter of the Star Wars saga to life. So join us as we dive in and unlearn what we have learned about the Star Wars story.
Is this the first time where we kind of get Qui-Gon's insight into Anakin a little bit? I mean, we saw his inquisitive look when they were at the table, you know, where he kind of goes, maybe there's something about this kid. But this is the first time we verbally get anything, right, from Qui-Gon, where it's like, yeah, there's something about this kid. And, yeah, I like that because it introduces Anakin a little bit in a mysterious side where it's like, ooh, what's he feeling? You know, is he, because we don't know yet, you know, other than he's got some kind of maybe force abilities or, well, no, we don't even know that yet. We just know that Qui-Gon said you got quick reflexes like a Jedi. Yeah, I don't know. I like the suspense here because you get that on Obi-Wan where not necessarily about Anakin, but Obi-Wan's like, what are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this mess? You know? And then Qui-Gon sort of introducing this mystery around Anakin a little bit. Like, I'm sensing something. We'll keep an eye on this kid, you know? So, yeah, I mean, that's just initial, but I'm really looking forward to your thoughts because you said last time, this is a big dialogue piece here. So lay it on me, man. Blow the mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're getting to the cool stuff. As soon as Shmi walks in and she has that conversation with Qui-Gon, that's where it gets really juicy. But here at the beginning here, yeah, it starts out, you know, pretty functional. It's just Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan's conversation. You know, it tells the audience like what their options are. You know, he says Obi-Wan kind of speaks for the audience. You know, what if this doesn't work? And Qui-Gon is going, well, we can't. It's too dangerous to call for help, and we can't. A ship without a power supply isn't going to get us anywhere, like he says. So it's kind of just reminding the audience of where we're at, what the problem is. But as you point out, there's that first time where Qui-Gon kind of says, and there's something about this boy. There's something special. There's something different about this kid. And it's the first time Qui-Gon voices that idea. We've seen him kind of give Anakin a look here or there in the last scene, the scene before that. But this is the first time he's vocalized it. So it really is cementing that point home that Qui-Gon sees something special in that kid. And as an audience, we hear that, we go, okay, what do you see? And it immediately gets answered as soon as he starts talking to Shmi, as soon as she walks in. So, yeah, I don't really have much to say about Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Their conversations there is pretty functional. But as soon as Shmi gets in, as soon as Shmi walks in, that's where the good stuff is, I think. So let's see. Yeah, just the first opening words they say to each other is that the first thing Qui-Gon says, you know, is you should be very proud of your son. He gives without any thought of reward. And she says he knows nothing of greed. And I just love that just because it's a perfect encapsulation of where Anakin starts. And of course, it's the exact opposite of where he ends up, you know, as Vader. All he wants is reward. He wants to rule the galaxy, make things the way he wants them to be. And he's all about greed, you know, and it's just so crazy. You can see this character arc of a character whose change is completely 180. You know, it's a lot of times you have, you know, heroes' journeys or stories where a character starts out like good, they're a decent person, and then they get better, you know, they become a hero, but then they don't do the whole Dark Knight, live long enough to see yourself become the villain kind of thing. It's very rare that you take a character through all that. At least these days, it's much more common. I'd say in like, you know, Greek tragedies and things like that. Like Macbeth is basically Anakin's story. A good person turned bad, except Macbeth doesn't get redeemed at the end. But yeah, so it's just I love that we can see a character in Star Wars go from, you know, from good to bad into good again. That's just a very rare arc that's explored with this much depth with this much time over the course of 6 movies. So it's just fun to see that reiterated where he starts out. You know, gives without any thought of reward, and he knows nothing of greed. It's just a great, just a great encapsulation of where Anakin is right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to kind of along those lines? And we can save this for later if you want. Do you want to talk about the Greedo scene that was cut here in light of that, or do you want to
Yeah,
wait?
I would.
Because it ties
I was
into
gonna
what you're
wait till
saying.
it. Yeah, I was gonna wait to talk about that scene because it comes up right after the pod race.
Oh, it's after the pod race. Okay, I thought it was
Yeah,
before. Okay, never mind
yeah,
then.
because
We'll hold off.
Greedo accuses him of cheating on the race.
Ah, okay,
That's why they start fighting. So yeah, so I
gotcha.
think we'll talk. I like to talk about that once it comes up
Yes, sounds good. Okay,
chronologically.
sounds
But
good.
yes,
You're making me think of it here, so I was like, ooh, I wonder. And I was thinking it was pre-pod race, but you're right. Okay,
yeah, I think it's after. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
sounds good. Okay, we'll leave you all in suspense. Yeah.
But and then yeah, just the dialogue here is just so there's so many juicy bits here. So when Qui-Gon says, well, Shmi says he knows nothing of greed. He has, and she kind of hesitates, and he goes, he has special powers. And so Qui-Gon, he starts to explain what his suspicions were. What we were as an audience were wondering, wait, what does he see so special about this kid? What does he see that's so special about him? And so he starts revealing, he has special powers. He can see things before they happen. And you think about it, it's like, yeah, Anakin had, and we don't even know this in the story yet, but Anakin had an intuition that Qui-Gon Jinn was going to free him. He's like, I think you're here to free us. He did that. He had that intuition before Qui-Gon before it even entered his brain, you know. And as Qui-Gon says, it's why he appears to have such quick reflexes. How does this human get a pod race? The fact that this little kid has survived pod racing is a clue to Qui-Gon that he's probably got something special when it comes to his perception, his reflexes and all that. And again, it's such a cool because this is the seed, right, that causes his downfall. Eventually, he puts too much faith in his ability to see things before they happen, and it's what takes his wife from him. It's what ruins his life. It's those visions of the future that kind of mess with him. But right now, it's still just that power he has is, again, he's using it for good, and it's all in a good context at this point. But again, the seeds of his fall are planted right here, and it's you can't skip this story. I know everyone says, you can just start with episode 2. You gotta start here.
Mm-hmm. It's so crucial, especially when he leaves his mom, which we'll come to. But yeah, that's such a big deal in his life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good stuff. I was reading the archives book this morning, so I've been looking at some of the quotes. Well, I'll save some of these for later. We'll come to them. But there's some good stuff in there talking about some of this. But I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the Jedi taking kids? So have we talked about this? I don't think we've talked about this. Because, he talks about here, if he'd been younger or if he'd been born in the Republic, we would have identified him a lot earlier. And, there's this kind of idea of no attachments. And I say that because it plays into this conversation in particular, but also it really plays into Anakin's attachment to his mom, right? And how this will affect him deeply for the whole rest of his life. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I've heard people say, like, is that a bad thing for the Jedi? It's kind of weird, like they're kidnapping children almost, and yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Or what have you heard? And
I don't think George sees it as a bad thing. He's talked about, the reason him growing up with his mom is a problem is because he becomes attached to her. It's the very, that's no secret. Everyone knows that he has his inability to let her go. And so the idea is that the Jedi are trained to love everyone equally and not favor certain people because it's an advantage for us. Like, this is my favorite person, and so I want to, protect them, and like Anakin tries to do with Padme, and because it's selfish ultimately. So I don't think, I don't think it's ever. Do the Jedi kidnap children? I'm not sure if that's a thing. I think the parents give them up voluntarily, right? I mean, because it's never. I'd have to look at what's detailed out in the Clone Wars, but I don't think George ever says in any of his movies or any of his shows that the Jedi steal the kids. I think that's something that the parents give the kid up. I think willingly, like it's an honor. Like it's a that's very ancient idea. Like this is actually, I'm probably opening up a rabbit hole here that's probably unproductive. But anyway, the idea, like, there, and many old tribes, and like hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, if there was a kid that, and today they would kind of talk about it in schizophrenic terms, but there were these kids who, had visions or had heard voices and things like this, and these kids would have been selected. The tribe, the group, the culture would know that, okay, this is one of those people. We've seen these people before, and they're trained to be the shaman, the holy man, basically. And so that's a tradition that I think the Jedi are kind of connected to, where it's like when you see someone with these special abilities, these special insight, that the culture around them knows, oh, this is what they're destined for. They're that's their place in our society. This guy's a carpenter, this guy's a painter, this guy's going to be the monk, that's what the Jedis are, right? They're warrior monks, basically. Or they turn into warrior monks. They shouldn't be warriors, really. But so yeah, I don't have a problem with. I don't think there's anything wrong. If they are kidnapping babies, that'd be a problem, yes. But I don't think that's what's happening, and I don't think their influence on the kids is bad. I think it's in the ideal of the Jedi isn't bad. It's just it can, certain Jedi fall short of that, and of course when you add to that the Sith influence that Palpatine has over Anakin, that causes a lot of problems. But I don't really think I have a problem with that personally. I don't think George sees it as something that's wrong that the Jedi do. I think it's that's just, I'd have to do a little more research on that. I haven't thought too much about that, but from what I've heard George say, I'm pretty sure he's on board with that. And I don't think there's anything super shady going on with the way the Jedi do that, at least according to the story that George is telling. There might be Legends material that does some weird stuff. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that because I've heard a lot of fans speculate like, oh, that's a sign of how kind of fearful and dogmatic the Jedi become. Like they don't want any relationships that can be even have the possibility of an attachment, So whereas you, and oh my goodness, sorry, there's so many thoughts running through my head. Whereas like the Skywalkers sort of bring that back in the sense of like bringing it back into balance, or it's like, no, maybe emotions and these relationships are good, but you just need to be able to let them go, and that's more of the balance. Because the Sith are like, no, I have to have them. It's all about me. I will not let go. And the Jedi are like, no, we're not even going to have those relationships. Where it seems to me like the balance is like, well, no, we can have a marriage relationship. We can have a mother-child relationship, but we just need to be able to let go. And that's where balance lies. So I was curious on your thoughts, or if you heard anything of what George kind of says about the Jedi and taking kids so young that they don't even remember their families. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Has George commented on that? Is it a sign of their dogma and their fear, or so not necessarily kidnapping, you know what I mean, but like sort of enforcing that. Whereas the Sith are clearly like, no, I'm gonna kidnap them and enslave them.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think from what I've gathered from studying what George has said about these things, I know he does mention this a few times, so I'll have to look into that. But I do know that every time he does talk about the Jedi and the Sith, he never really talks about something in between them that's the ideal. He always talks about the Jedi being the ideal and the Sith being wrong. There's usually not anything, this is kind of where a lot of the fans kind of go too far and go into that sort of gray Jedi theory. And I think, as far as I can tell, George never really says anything to give credit to that. It's mostly the Jedi are good, Sith are evil. You should stay on the Jedi path. And so that leads me to believe that everything the Jedi do, or at least should be doing, is something that George thinks is good, is fine, is good and right for them to do. So I don't think, I'm inclined to think that he doesn't have a problem with what the Jedi do with the kids. Otherwise, it would be, if he did, I think it'd be the Sith who were doing it, So I think that's just what those two factions are used for. Is the Sith is the camp you fall into if you start being selfish and doing wrong, and the Jedi are the camp you fall into if you're doing what's right. So, I think it comes down to just, the name of the last movie, right, is Return of the Jedi. So the whole point is to bring the Jedi back. And so the Jedi aren't this horrible, I don't necessarily think that I think we've gone a little too far as fans, I think, in saying the Jedi are very corrupt and very dogmatic. I think they definitely have their problems. George definitely talks about them being arrogant and blind. But yeah, I don't think they're quite as bad as we make them out to. I think we lump them in with the Republic and with the Senate a lot, because George does talk about the corruption in the Senate and corruption in the government. But he never really quite lumps the Jedi and the Senate together. Like they're kind of in each other's pockets every once in a while. And George, I think in an archive book, I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but he does talk about how it's kind of it's a tricky situation where they're forced to become warriors and forced to become soldiers, and like, are they supposed, like, yeah, it's a tricky thing, but he never quite outright says the Jedi are corrupt. And so I don't really want to, or dogmatic or anything like that. So like Palpatine calls them dogmatic, but he's not the most reliable source, right? So he is the ultimate liar. So yeah, so my instinct is to say that based on what I know about George, that what he says about the Jedi and the Sith, that if the Jedi are doing it, it's good. If the Sith are doing it, it's bad. Of course, they mess up a lot of things, but the Jedi ideal, I guess, is a good one. So I don't think there'd be too much of a problem with the kid thing, but I'll have to look into that. I'll have to look through my notes and see what other quotes I have from him written down that I can find about that particular topic, because that is a tricky issue, because it's, yeah, even when I said kidnapping before, yes, I know they don't kidnap them, but it's like, well, they're denying them interaction with their families, and even that, like, I'm not sure if the Jedi never actually get to go back and see their family ever, if that's like not allowed. It's more just maybe they just don't really do it. They're kind of discouraged. I don't know. It's just, yeah, I really thought about that in great detail, but just from an overall bigger picture point of view, I guess that's what I would say, but without having done a lot of specific research into it. That's a great question. That's a good point. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I'm really curious, and as we go along, I'm curious. I'm excited to learn more and curious. It's because I do feel, we'll come to this when we get to it later. But just where the Jedi are here on the spectrum. Are they in their prime? Are they kind of at the end of their prime? Like, how's this all work? Because we've mentioned before, was that episode 2, where Mace Windu says, "I think it's time we inform the Council. Our ability to use the Force is diminished," and Yoda's like, "We're arrogant," and we see in the Clone Wars a lot of Jedi falling off, and their whole lives are being like mixed up, and there's a bunch of conundrums, and I think George uses that word. And what's this idea of balance look like? Because I know George has mentioned balance is not a scale between light and dark; it's an elimination of the dark. But what does that look like? So I'm just curious, because we see the Jedi here. They're not, I don't know, they're just in such a weird place because they're struggling, but I'm not sure what that would mean. Yeah, and I agree with the gray thing for sure. Like, that just doesn't seem like a Lucas thing to do this whole gray Jedi in between thing. It's like, well, no, I mean, he's pretty clear, like, balance of the Force means just light. But what does it look like? Where are the Jedi on that spectrum now? So anyway, we can get more to that, but that made me think about it with this, and with just kind of how their treatment of children plays into that, and what does it tell us about where the Jedi are? Is it a good thing? Is it just like, yeah, it's just kind of what they've always done, it's fine, or like you said, maybe this is considered by the galaxy like such an honor. Most people are like, yeah, this is great, we'll do it. I was just curious. So that's a bit of a rabbit hole, but
no, it's a good important one, because honestly, yeah, I have been kind of had to change my perspective on this a lot recently, because I did kind of get used to that idea that, Qui-Gon was the symbol of he's a true Jedi, a perfect Jedi, and like Mace Windu kind of represents like the failure of the Jedi and how they're a problem, and then the more I've been studying Lucas and watching the movie, I realized, all those ideas didn't really come from the movies. At least they're not coming from George. They're coming from like may not be coming from fans. It might not be like a total like fake fan theory like the Grey Jedi thing, but they're not exactly tied to stuff George has said or has shown us in the movies. So I just in the recent months, I'm trying to be more careful about that, because I think it might have changed. I think it might have tainted my view of the films and the story a little bit. That perspective, I might be missing something that George was trying to communicate, because he might be trying to say something slightly different. So, so I'm kind of, it's good that you brought that up, because I am kind of in the process of trying to reevaluate that, because I've heard that story for several years now, and it makes sense in a lot of ways. But there's other ways where I go, maybe we kind of missed it, because George never says Qui-Gon isn't a great Jedi, but he doesn't really ever hold him up or point to him saying he's like the only one that got it. I think he's a picture of a good Jedi. I think, Obi-Wan follows in his footsteps and is equally as good too. I think Obi-Wan gets kind of shortchanged a lot of times, where it's like, no, actually he turns out to be a pretty good Jedi. So
Yeah.
yeah, and nothing inherently, wrong or bad about Mace Windu either. He's just suspicious of Anakin. So I don't know. Well, I'm excited to kind of unpack that more, because it's kind of a real paradigm shift for me. So yeah, we'll see. We'll go on this journey together. I'll figure out what we figure out. But
I'm looking forward to it. That's a question I've always had. So yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to read this. This is kind of cool. Just in light of what you said, this is George commenting on Qui-Gon. He says, Qui-Gon's an outlier, an independent soul. Even though he's a Jedi, he doesn't just go along. He's not neutral. One could say that he is, in essence, a troublemaker, because he wants to do it his way. In that case, he's me. George laughs. So, yeah. I thought that was interesting. Is that, speaking of paradigm shift, that kind of made me think about that. I've always viewed Qui-Gon as like the epitome of like what balance and what the Jedi should be. And I'm not sure that's wrong necessarily, but here George kind of gives a little bit more of like, he's kind of stubborn.
Yeah, well, that's another. He is very similar to Anakin in that sense, right? Because Anakin is kind of the same way, where he is this great Jedi during the Clone Wars and the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, but he's also a bit of a troublemaker too. He's a bit of a rebel. He's a bit of a, he doesn't always agree with the Council. So it's very much, and then George has talked about that, how Qui-Gon and Anakin are both, at least in relation to Obi-Wan, they kind of serve the same role, where Obi-Wan is the center line, and Anakin and Qui-Gon deviate from that, and Obi-Wan's always there to try and rein them back in. But in the end of the day, he ends up learning from both of them too, and he ends up being he ends up becoming kind of a rebel himself, or being a little more reckless and crazy himself. So I think it does his own brand of being an outlier, being a bit of a rebel. So, or as he says to Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda says Luke's reckless, he says, "Was I any different when you taught me?" So there was, Obi-Wan definitely does have a bit of that recklessness in him. But so it'll be fun to figure this out. I'm sure, it'll only become more clear as we go through the story. But
yeah, very good.
But speaking of Qui-Gon, good.
I was just gonna say, Qui-Gon makes a really good Skywalker patriarch.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that's all I have.
No, you're good. And actually, we'll kind of get into that here. So Qui-Gon, the next thing he says, I think is interesting, is that he says the Force is unusually strong with him. And so it's just interesting that, again, we don't really have any context for any other kids this age who have the Force. That's one thing we kind of have to remind ourselves, that the Skywalkers are special. That they're not, the way the Skywalkers are going about interacting with the Force is not what's normal. They're all unusually strong. Like Luke says, the Force is strong in my family, meaning the way his journey and Anakin's journey are very different. And so sometimes I think we can catch ourselves being, looking at Anakin, looking at Luke to be the rule for what Jedi are. It's like, well, no, Luke and Anakin both progress very quickly, and they're both, their journeys are both kind of unorthodox. And so I've caught myself doing that, where I look at, well, how quickly, how come, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but there are times where I see something where I go, oh, what? But Anakin did this way, or Luke did it this way, or maybe looking at Ahsoka or looking at a different Jedi, and it's like, well, Ahsoka doesn't have the Force running strong in her family. She can use the Force. She's been trained, but she's not, unusually strong with it like Luke and Anakin are, and Leia. That whole family is different. So that's kind of the first time we see that stated here, that the Force is unusually strong, Anakin. Because because it's all we see usually. It's the only Jedi we really saw until Ahsoka going through the whole Jedi life is Anakin and Luke. Even though it's said it's unique, in my brain, my fan brain, I'm just so used to it, it becomes kind of normal to me. I'm like, oh, that's just what a Jedi is. But like, no, it's actually they're very different. So that was just a nice reminder once I came across that line, like, oh yeah, the Force is unusually strong with him. And so now we understand why Qui-Gon is more trusting of this kid, because the Force is using Anakin just as much as he's using it, right? The Force has a will of its own, and Qui-Gon, of course, trusts it, and he trusts the living Force more than anything. And so that's kind of explains why he's more trustful of Anakin than Obi-Wan would be, or Padme definitely would be. That's why they're kind of going, what's wrong with you? And he's like, no, I got this. We're good.
Huh. Wow, what a great point. And that's so big, because I think you look at any Star Wars outside of George Lucas Star Wars, it's just kind of I mean, it's just like you said, it's the natural tendency to be like, oh, normal Jedi equals the Skywalkers, normal Star Wars equals the Skywalkers. Like every, fan made, I'm throwing Disney in this too. Every fan made Star Wars is that way. Like we're just going to recreate the same steps. That's a really good point, man. They all have to be super special, go through the same way, be kind of rebellious, and they have a droid sidekick. It's like, wow, that's a great point.
Yeah, it's like we got to remember that Anakin and Luke are prodigies, right? They're not. This isn't. They're fast tracking on their way to 6. Like, and we'll see that in episode 2. Like Anakin calls it out. He calls Obi-Wan out, and the Jedi's like, I'm really ahead of him. Like I'm ready for the trials, and he's only whatever he is, 19. Or Obi-Wan, the Jedi Council wasn't quite sure if Obi-Wan was ready for it when he was 25. So in this movie, so yeah, and that's one thing I guess to talk about modern Star Wars. Right now we're in the middle of Ahsoka's show, and so seeing Sabine is an interesting arc, because she's, as far as I can tell so far, we're only in episode 5 or 6 of that show, and it seems like Sabine has less than she's like the opposite of Anakin, where it's like unusually strong. It's like she's like barely has enough Force sensibility to make it work to survive as a Jedi. So it's interesting seeing that. Like that's probably more closer to what a regular Jedi has to go through, is that they're, they have an aptitude, but it's not super strong with them. So it really takes a long time for them to cultivate that connection and get really good at it. Whereas, Luke's lifting rocks on his like second day in Dagobah or whatever. He progresses super quickly, and so does Anakin. So it's fun to see. Just to remind ourselves of that. Yeah, Anakin is special, Luke is special, Leia is special. The fact that Leia can sense Luke calling out to her on Bespin without any training at all, it's like that means this Force is very strong with her if she has had 0 training, and that's what she can already sense that. So.
Oh, that's great. That's so cool, man. I love it. Mind blown. I need a mind blown button, dude. I can just push the button with a sound effect.
We'll just have the Death Star exploding sound effect.
Yeah, awesome.
Every time your brain explodes.
That'd be fantastic.
It's true. And again, like it. I'm saying this now as if I know everything. No, like this blew my mind too when I was looking at it. I'm like, oh, it's all here. It's all, everything you need to know about Star Wars is in the movies. And it's just so sad how much I've gone to other sources to try and like make Star Wars make sense. Like, no, it's all here, and all this stuff is right in front of me. I've never paid attention to it. Part of it is because I grew up with it. And it became so, second nature to me that I didn't really think about it. But anyway, so that's one thing. I want to, and again, the scene is awesome because there's so many things like this. So,
that's so cool. I have a huge rabbit trail question in my mind, but I'm not sure I should ask it.
No, go for it. We'll see where it goes.
Okay, we can save this for another time if you want. But there's a lot of debate in particularly the Star Wars Ahsoka show that's going on right now. In light of that, and that's a great point, what is normal? How do you want to say it? Can anybody be a Jedi? You know what I mean? Is it, how much is gifting? How much is cultivating discipline? How much is, can anybody come be a Jedi? Or is it just like a select few that can do it? I don't know how to phrase that quite well as a question, but I'm curious in light of if you've heard of anything George saying on or commenting on that.
He does talk about it in the archive book, I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if you got to that point, and I'd have to go back, and I don't know if I could find that quote right now, but you definitely, obviously everyone has a connection with the Force, has the ability to connect to the Force, but not everyone has an aptitude for it, and not everyone is, more talented in it. Everyone can, let's see, because the Force definitely, maybe this is a better way of thinking about it. I just thought of this, so this could be completely wrong, but the Force can use everyone, but not everyone can use the Force. So the Force is connected with everybody. The Force is, may the Force be with you, the will of the Force, all that. The Force does have you know, Han Solo is in service to the Force, right? Even though he may not be using it consciously. And so I think not everyone can probably be a Jedi, because Jedi requires training and discipline to become. It's not just your connection with the Force that makes you a Jedi. It's, as we see in Return of the Jedi, it's at the end of the day, Luke throws down his saber and says, "I'm going to love my father. I have no reason to. He's been nothing but horrible to me, but I'm going to stand up for him. I'm going to stand up against you and not give you what you want." Him being the Emperor. So it's like that. It's not, and at the end of the day, it's not so much your Force ability that makes you a Jedi. It's how you conduct yourself. It's selfless acts that make you a Jedi, or make you worthy of being a Jedi. But of course, having a Force connection is part of it. So I would say, that everyone can connect with the Force. Everyone has the ability to do that. Again, from what the movies say is that everyone has midichlorians in them. Everyone has this connection with the Force, and if you are trained in the Force, trained to use it, you can become very, very powerful and get very, very far with it. If you're not trained, you may, I don't know. It's like, it's a question. Like, does Han Solo get to be a Jedi if he's trained? Does he have any kind of connection with the Force at all? He does, but is his connection with it strong enough that he can cultivate it into being maybe a Jedi, or is it something that's completely, or would he be completely out of it? Because he doesn't believe, right? He doesn't trust it. He doesn't, at first, he doesn't think the Force is real. It's an interesting question. I think, I know George talks about that. And again, I'd have to do some more research before I give any clear answer. This is me just talking around saying, I don't know. I think what I will say is that, not everyone can be a Jedi. That's pretty clear. But everyone can connect with the Force, and everyone has, and the Force is, in everyone. Everyone is a vessel for it. Every living thing is. So even if they don't want to use the Force, even if they're never trained for it, the Force is going to be used, or the Force is going to use them in a weird way, regardless. But so that's, I don't know. I'd have to look at more specifically what George says, but I know he's talked about that. I'm pretty sure I don't think he ever says anyone can be a Jedi. I think he just says everyone can use the Force, but we'll see.
Okay. That's helpful to know, because I've learned over the years that, I kind of fall into the prequel category. Like, I grew up with the prequels more so than with the original trilogy. I'm kind of in between, but it's been interesting to listen to those guys who grew up in the 70s, 80s with just the original trilogy, how they really, I've heard so many people say they just struggle from that generation with the prequels because of this idea that there's only a select chosen or special gifting that can be Jedi. Because they always grew up with like, oh, anybody can be a Jedi. You just need to have this training and discipline. And I've heard a lot of fan pushback against midichlorians and giftings and stuff like that because of that very reason. That struck me. And so I was curious. I went, George, again, not to put the emphasis on the fans and their beliefs, it's George's story. But I was just curious on what George says about that. And then here, we see there is some kind of process in identifying who has the Force to become a Jedi. I mean, it seems really clear that there is some kind of formal way that is based on your midichlorians or based on gifting. It doesn't seem like, oh, sure, you want to be a Jedi, just come on in, It seems like you've been gifted and you're chosen versus, he just takes discipline, So, we see that in the way Qui-Gon, he takes the blood count, and, in the Clone Wars, we see that the Jedi are aware of these Force-sensitive kids, and they seem to be their own category. So I was just curious on what you thought. Anyway, we can come back to it if we want now, but...
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. That's a big idea in all of Star Wars is, who can use the Force and everything. But, yeah.
It seems to me that George meant it to be really clear-cut, not necessarily like, just anybody, but...
But he does, I know for sure he says something along these lines, and this is a helpful way, at least it was helpful for me to think about it this way, which is... when I was in 8th grade, I ran track, and we had our shirts. I can't remember whose quote this was, or I don't know if it was even said on the shirt, who said this, but it's one of those kind of sports quotes, which is hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's good.
And I think that's a good way of thinking about the Force that way, which is, Anakin and Luke and Leia, the Skywalkers, as talented as they are, as much of an aptitude as they have for the Force, training is not. If they're not going to get trained, it's not going to help. A Jedi with a much weaker connection to the Force, a smaller midichlorian count, but with a lot of training, could definitely defeat. Well, Obi-Wan against Anakin and Mustafar, he defeats him. Obi-Wan is not as powerful, or is not able to become as powerful as Anakin could be. But Anakin has a blind spot. His anger and his rage gets in his way, and so Obi-Wan's training is superior in that moment, even though Obi-Wan's less powerful, ultimately. So I think that's the bigger lesson than who's born with better bone structure and muscle density that they're obviously going to be a great athlete. It's like, well, but if they don't work hard, it's a Michael Jordan thing. Like, is Michael Jordan great because he was just born to be a basketball player, or is it because he worked super hard to be the best? So I think that's an interesting way of that's been helpful for me to think about. Okay, well, some people get to be a Jedi and some people don't. Well, yeah, but some people deserve it. Some people earned it. Some people worked for it to be a Jedi, and other people, there are probably a bunch of Jedi who had really high midichlorian counts and didn't, kind of took it for granted and were like, I'm the best, and, failed in some big way or something, Well, Yoda, for example, Obi-Wan says, even Master Yoda's isn't that high. And even Yoda, as powerful as he is, he has a huge blind spot. He, didn't see the Empire coming and all that, and the Emperor and the Darth Sidious. So, yeah, I think the idea of, being a Jedi, anyone could be a Jedi. It's like, well, everyone has the potential, but not everyone can. But you have to put the hard work into. I think maybe that was George's way of in the prequels, was kind of saying that this is a hard, as Qui-Gon says later in this movie, it's a hard life being a Jedi, and so it's not always this. It's not this great gift all the time. It could be a bit of a slog sometimes. But anyway,
okay,
just a thought.
Yeah, well, we'll get into it more. Yeah. Okay. All right, man. So the big father question. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is this is like every line in this scene is just really interesting, because when she said he wasn't a father, this is just is such an old idea, right? So Anakin doesn't have a father, so he's a product of immaculate conception, right? So like many obviously religious and spiritual figures, not just Jesus, but there's a lot of mythic figures that their birth was prophesized to be unique, which symbolized their divine status. And so Anakin's like essentially the demigod in mythology. He's like Hercules or something like that, because he's still human, but he's got a bit of the divine in him. And and it's like virgin births, many other kinds of miraculous births. They're all over mythology, and obviously the one we're familiar with is Jesus' virgin birth in Christianity. But that idea actually pops up in a lot of in mythology and literature. And so one that comes to mind is Romulus and Remus. So they're the twin founders of Rome, according to myth and legend. They were born of the Virgin Aelia. In ancient Egypt, the Ra, the sun god, he was born of a virgin mother. In ancient Greece, Dionysus was the son of the Virgin Persephone. So it's a common theme, which is interesting. I'm not exactly sure why that idea is so prevalent.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
But anyway, but either way, it's always the hero who is born of the Virgin for some reason. So regardless where it comes from, this is owing to that tradition. So this identifies Anakin as the hero. So now we know who this story is about, because we've gone through this whole movie and we haven't quite had like a clear main character. We've had Padme's story. We've had the Jedi are kind of our guide to the story, but finally we get to our main character, and this is kind of the clue to the audience now. Oh, this story from now on is going to be about Anakin. That's what all this is leading up to. We thought Tatooine was going to be this pit stop. Actually, we're here. This is what the whole movie's about. Is we should have gotten to Tatooine because this is where our main character is. And it also tells us, him being born of a virgin tells us what his role will be, because everyone knows, the savior born of a virgin. So Anakin is destined to be the savior of this world, this galaxy. So that's what Anakin's going to do. Unfortunately, there's a wrench thrown in the middle of that story around about episode 3, and our savior's future doesn't look too bright at that point. But anyway, there's thankfully there's an original trilogy that gets us there. But So yeah, it's such a clear, every once in a while, Star Wars just really dips into deep mythology and isn't shy about it, and it's just stuff like that. It's just really cool, and it just tells you, yeah, it's just an ancient story that's told in a new way again, and it's still relevant, still popular today. Yeah, so that's there's that idea. I just yeah, nothing crazy, nothing special, but just it owes to just a very ancient tradition.
Yeah.
Goes, whether it's Egypt, a Roman, or Christian. So
yeah, just another standard virgin birth. You know how they go.
Well, I mean, it's weird how it is. Like we're kind of so used to that idea, but it is a crazy idea. It is, there's something like, oh, maybe that's what it is. Like it should be impossible with this event. But so that's why it's probably what signifies it as being special. That he came into this world in a unique way. Like he was born a slave, but his just from day one, I guess from the get go, there's something special about him. I guess is probably part of what it means. But the last thing I'll say about that is it's interesting that Anakin doesn't have a father, because there is, and you said that Qui-Gon's like sort of the patriarch of the family, because there is a little hint of romance between Qui-Gon and Shmi throughout the movie. Just little, it's very subtle, just a look here or there, but it develops again that idea of Qui-Gon becoming the surrogate father for Anakin. That the one he needs, that'll help him, as opposed to the basically Watto, the version he has now.
Yeah, man. I find it. I was just thinking of that, just the virgin birth, and in Christianity at least, it's the idea of like, well, there's a purity from the gods coming down into human flesh, and and then we get salvation through very unexpected means, which have very much encompassed Star Wars. Anakin's journey is not predictable in the sense of like the traditional normal story, which is great. I like it. And we see that it's all very intentional, but through the Force, the Force has a plan. So has George commented on anything about how this happened? Because I know, again, this is Legends, but that Darth Plagueis novel that came out several years ago before Disney bought it talks about how Palpatine and his master, which I'm drawing a blank, Plagueis, Darth Plagueis, were messing with the Force, and they kind of triggered this event somehow. Like, I don't know, I can't remember if that book said like this, they caused it or whatever. And I know that's not George's Star Wars, but I want to say that I heard somewhere that George at least toyed with this idea that the Emperor made this happen somehow. I want to say that was maybe in a deleted scene, or there was it was an idea and then went away, and then this book kind of built upon that. But I was just curious on if you've heard anything official from George of like the dark side's role in promoting a virgin birth here, because I know George has said that the dark side has its own prophecies about the chosen one too. Like there's both sides have seen this coming, and they both have different expectations for him. But I was curious on your thoughts, or what you've heard.
Yeah, so you're right in that it comes from a deleted scene. Or I don't know if it's a deleted scene, but it was in the script of Revenge of the Sith, where I think it's in this scene where Anakin turns to the dark side, where Palpatine reveals himself. But he mentions, like, I influenced the midichlorians to create you, basically. And he says, you can think of me as your own father. In a weird way, you can think of me as your father, kind of. It was sort of like a twist on the I am your father scene from Empire Strikes Back. But that wasn't in the movie, and it was taken out. And I do know, I can't remember exactly where. I think it's worth finding it. But in the archive book, Lucas, I remember coming across this when I read it, like, whoa, I'd never heard that, where he does talk about how he thinks what happened to get Anakin to be born. And in this version, I don't remember exactly what he says, but in the archive, it has nothing to do with Palpatine or Plagueis.
That's interesting.
And I like this, his version. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be and let me put that in bold typeface and huge quotation marks. I'm pretty sure that George said that it was the midichlorians, it was the wills. That's what it was. It was the wills that wanted they wanted Anakin to be born. Like they're the ones who set it into motion, because they're the ones kind of behind everything. but that it was sort of that it was a instead of these evil people conspiring to create him, that it was a benevolent, force for good. They create Anakin because he would be necessary to bring the bring the galaxy peace and bring the force back into balance. I'm pretty sure that was something along those lines, but again, pretty sure. I can't remember exactly, and I don't remember exactly where it is in the. I'm making notes on my archive book so I can find stuff easier later, but I haven't found that one yet. So, but once you get, I'm sure once you get there, I'm sure you'll see it. Because it's like, oh, George is explaining where Anakin came from. It's really cool. But yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Super cool.
At least at this point, he changed his mind somewhere during Revenge of the Sith, and he said, "No, actually, I'm going to have Plagueis and Sidious aren't going to be the ones responsible for it." Which is, it's a cool idea still, but I don't think it's what George ultimately decided on. But yeah, it is from a deleted line from the script.
Gotcha. And that's where the book spring about from. That makes sense. Yep. I knew it was sometime to the something there official, but yeah. And then who are the Wills again? Can you just define that for the listeners maybe? Because I know George has mentioned them, but they never show up in necessarily any of the live action stuff.
Yeah. 1 sec. I'm looking for that quote from that piece of line from the script.
Are you looking in the script book? I don't remember the name of that one.
Oh, the illustrated screenplay. Yeah, no, this is in my notes from. No, this was a line from Revenge of the Sith. Here it is. Okay, so Darth Sidious says, "I have waited all these years for you to fulfill your destiny. I arranged for your conception. I used the power of the Force to will the midichlorians to start the cell divisions that created you." Anakin says, "I don't believe you." And Sidious says, "But you know it's true." So this is where it's that parallel to Empire Strikes Back. When you clear your mind, you will sense the truth. You could almost think of me as your father. Anakin says, "That's impossible." Again, like Luke says. And Darth says, Nevertheless, you must decide.
He doesn't yell out no at that point. No.
Yeah, exactly. That's as far as it goes. I don't know
he
what
does that
happens
later.
after that. That was just his, yeah. But so basically, so the Wills, so it's a bit of a tricky question. Like, what are the Wills? Because there's not a whole lot said about them. But basically, again, my understanding is that they're this kind of higher being that is they're connected with the Force, and the name is kind of a giveaway. Like the will, like their will is kind of, the Force is kind of in service to their will, I think, is the idea. And so,
they're not the Mortis gods, right?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, and then they're not the Force priestesses that show up in Yoda's arc in the Clone Wars?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we never actually see the Wills, I'm pretty sure, in anything. George just kind of talks about them.
Because if I remember right, George was going to make them pretty big players in Star Wars somewhere. I don't remember if that was his original treatment or if that was the sequel trilogy he was working on. I don't remember, but
here we go. Perfect. I found the quote where he talks about Anakin and the midichlorians. I think this will play into the Wills too, but he says, "The midichlorians started the birth process in Anakin's mother. The Wills communicated the command to the midichlorians, which activated the DNA that germinated the egg. That's why Anakin doesn't have a father. He was, in a bizarre and metaphorical way, touched by God, but in this case, they happen to be one-celled animals." So it was the Wills that conspired to have Anakin be born. Let's see if I can find what he says about the Wills, because that's a hard idea. It's a difficult concept to keep in my head. It's because it's not very attached to like the story, like the plot of what's happening in Star Wars. So I kind of always forget what the Wills are a lot of the time, and what he talks about them. But maybe I might save that for another. I might save an answer next time where I can have a better answer for it, because that's a tricky one. I want to get that right. I don't want
that is kind of a big deal.
I don't want to read something off of Wikipedia and be like, that's what it is, and have it totally be off from what George says. So anyway, but at least we got the midichlorian thing for Anakin sorted out. So that's in the very end of the archive book. It's like the last couple of pages where he talks about that. But so
oh wow, okay,
yeah. So okay, in that sense, it Palpatine and Plagueis are not mentioned. They're not. They don't seem to be the ones who are in charge of that.
Okay.
Unless it's a situation where Palpatine thought he did it and it was actually the wills in spite of him doing it. But that doesn't. That's pure speculation on my part. So I think it's more likely that just Sidious and Palpatine have nothing to do with it. But
okay.
Anyway,
gotcha. Cool. Big question. Sorry, I'm hitting you hard today.
No, you're good. Yeah, I was like, I need to. Every time I think I'm prepared, I'm like, I go through my notes again and I watch those scenes, and you always hit me with something like, I never would have expected we were going to go there. Okay, I got to figure that out. But no, you're good. It's good because I have to keep the stuff in my head.
Just a thorn in your side, man.
No, a very lovely thorn, a wonderful thorn.
Thanks, man. I'm honored
so much. No, you're good.
Yeah.
But
I'm just so excited to learn. These are questions I've had for years.
There's so many
and
cool
years.
things, yeah, and yeah, me too. Like I'm learning all this, and so it's just helping me to retain it. You're keeping me on my toes. I appreciate it. But the last thing in that scene was she says, "Can you help him?" And he says, "I'm not." He says, "I'm not sure." I think he said, "I didn't exactly come here to free slaves." And it's one little tiny, very filmmaking nerdy thing, is that very last shot of Qui-Gon is a reshoot. I don't know if you saw that or if you noticed that. It's if you look at that shot of him, looks a little slightly different than all the other shots in that scene because they went back and shot it in the studio later because they changed the dialogue. If you look at that screenplay for the film, all his dialogue about, we would have identified him early, that comes at the end of the scene. And he talks about like, he would have been trained as a Jedi and all that, but he's too old now and whatever. So they took that out and George added that new ending to it. Probably just add again more of that kind of uncertainty, like where is this going to go? What's Qui-Gon and Anakin's relationship going to be? But it's just interesting because Qui-Gon goes like, I'm not sure if I can do anything here. I'm not sure what to do about this, really powerful kid, because he doesn't know how powerful Anakin is yet. He doesn't know. You wonder if the idea of the chosen one is in his head at this point yet. You wonder if he's even considered that.
Qui-Gon's head, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If he's even thought about Anakin that way yet, or if that comes later when the midichlorians when the midichlorian count comes in.
Good call. I never thought about that.
Yeah, at this point, it's like he's just not sure. He's like, I don't know what this could just be a very force sensitive kid that I can't help, or is he? Yeah, has he? Again, he's like, I'm not sure if I can free slaves. Once he realizes, this is the chosen one, and he's like, well, I think I have to step in here and do it, even though he wants to free slaves. You'd like to, but you're not sure if he's also has a duty to protect Naboo, right? And then he kind of puts it all in the pod race and kind of says, well, as important as the mission to Naboo is in saving those people, I also think that this kid might be the secret to saving the whole galaxy. So maybe it's worth it to spend a little extra time in ensuring that this kid is freed and is trained as a Jedi. But it's just interesting. I'm not quite sure when Qui-Gon when he hits all these milestones and realizing what Anakin is, and so it's just that the way the scene ends. It's like, I wonder where Qui-Gon is at this point.
Yeah, that's cool. I love the idea of just watching sovereignty versus free will. Like the force of sovereignty going on and through the free will of the people. Because this is all going right according to plan, to the Force's plan. But Qui-Gon, just that foreshadow right there in that one little line. I didn't actually come here to free slaves. Well, yes, you did. You just didn't know it.
Exactly. Like Anakin, saw it. I think you have, and he's right. Actually, Qui-Gon just doesn't know it yet.
I love that. There's the tension, and we struggle with that. Everybody struggles with that. Even if you don't believe in God, people struggle with that. What does destiny have for me? Everybody feels that deeper sense of like, what am I supposed to do? I just think that's so cool. And George is picking it up here. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I had another thought, but I don't remember what it was. So it didn't matter. Yeah. Shoot. What was I going to say? Oh, well, it wasn't anything big or shattering, I know. So,
well, it is Star Wars. I don't know if we're shattering anyone's earth with what we're revealing here, but it's still fun. All of it's fun.
It is really fun. So then we move on to the introduction of the pod racer, which is cool. We get our first glimpse of the pod racer. And I just read this morning in the archive book. I did not even think about this, and I'm so dense. I should have known this. How George talked about, like, with the whole pod racing, how he just really loved, what was the name of that movie? I think Ben-Hur.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just the whole idea of, like, this is a Star Wars version of a chariot race. It's like, oh, how did I miss that?
I know, I felt like such an idiot when I realized that too. I was like, what? Oh, it's so obvious.
Yeah. Because I knew George was a big race fan. He loves cars, that kind of thing. He's a tech, or what'd you call him, a gearhead, I think you said last time. But I didn't even think about it being like a chariot race. It's like, oh, I mean, it's literally a chariot race. Instead of horses, it's machines. That's the only difference. Like, jeez. And I love the pod race. This is one of my all-time favorites. We're not quite to the pod race yet, but here's our introduction to the pod racer.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I love it. I still have my pod racer. I will never forget. So, Josiah and I, for those of you who don't know, we're cousins. And so we share the same grandma. And when I was, I was probably 12, 13, 14. And the pod racer for the vintage, well, it's not vintage collection back then, but the 3 3/4 inch figures came out. And I wanted it for my birthday. And my grandma was like, are you serious? Like, you really want this? Like, you're 13 years old. Yes, I want it so bad. And I still have it hanging on my wall right there. Nice. I have that toy pod racer. And I'll never forget that. I love the pod race. It's so cool.
Oh yeah, it was the coolest thing. And I remember I loved the episode 1 racer game. They played at your guys' house when we were kids. I loved that. Yeah, it was the coolest. Yeah, it was like the ultimate vehicle,
Oh,
like,
so cool.
Racing vehicle. It was so like impossibly fast, and it was just, it was so cool.
And I'm not a race car fan at all. Like, I don't like racing anything. But pod racing is like, I love it, So cool. Here's Anakin's pod racer. All right, man. Blow my mind here. I'm ready. Okay. What do you got for me on the introduction to Kister, Greedo, the pod race?
Okay. I'll try really hard to blow your mind with very mundane stuff in this scene.
Jar Jar getting his tongue numb.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, what I do like in this lead up to the pod race is that it does, even though we've established Anakin is special, it's this scene and up through the pod race, it starts to establish all these obstacles that are in Anakin's way. And it just, with each one that's introduced, it just makes the situation just seem more and more hopeless. And so like the first obstacle that I can see that is introduced here is that, he's 9 years old. First of all, like that's actually this was kind of established earlier. But it's like letting a child drive in like the Monaco Grand Prix. Like there's no, like that'd be crazy. There's no way to fix that to make Padme or his mom feel better about it. Like he's a kid, so like there's nothing we can do about that.
See, I never even thought about that, man.
Yeah, it's like it's not only is he a human who isn't really built for racing, at least so we're led to believe. All these other aliens are good at it because they have their quicker reflexes or whatever. He's a human and he's also a kid. So he's just got so many things going against him. Also, I guess real quick before I forget, in the scene, he does, again, just a little hint of that darkness that's in him. Right now it's fine, but he brags about entering the race. He's like, I'm entered in the Boonty Eve race tomorrow, And when his friends are kind of like, it's never going to run, you're going to be bug squash or whatever. You can, in that wide shot, you can kind of see him give him a dark look again. Kind of like, like, I'll show you guys. There's a bit of that, again, a little bit of darkness in him. Anyway, I just like pointing those out when they're there because, again, it's just, I like to hammer home the point that there's just so much of that story of Anakin's fall is just already in this first movie. But anyway, so the second obstacle is that he, as his friends point out, is that he's been working on his pod racer for years, and it hasn't run yet. Yeah. He's never actually driven this pod before. Like it hasn't run, and so when he said it's the fastest ever, he didn't know that. He was just saying that as a kid. You're like, oh, it's the fastest pod racer ever. You don't know that, kid. You don't know if it's for sure. But he has such confidence, right? But since we can't do anything about him being a kid, like I said from before, but we can do something about this. And so this little kid manages to get the pod racer up and running by himself. Like they said, you don't even know if it's going to run. He says it will. He never doubts his abilities. He's always confident, and he's right. that's his problem, is that he always thinks he can solve the problem, and he does. And episode 2, when he jumps off the speeder in Coruscant to falls out on the middle of nowhere, and Obi-Wan's like, "What are you doing?" He's so confident he's going to land on that was it Zam Wessel's speeder, and he does. And so every time he's powerful, and he knows it, and so that's another, again, big part of his problem in episode 3. But he's proved himself so far in this movie. So he's confident, and he's right. He's right to be confident in his abilities, because he's pretty special. And I do like in this scene where you can kind of see at the end, you see Shmi kind of hoping that the pod wouldn't run. So she's scared. She's kind of like sad at the end of it. She's like, "Hey, run! I'm proud of my son for fixing it and being great, but also I hate putting my son in this kind of danger." So she's scared, and no wonder. But she still tries to help him despite that.
Wow.
Talk about
parenting
Jedi
in a nutshell.
Yeah, talk about a Jedi trait, right? Like Anakin is sort of already learning how to be a Jedi from his mother. Talk about being selfless, where she's like, "Okay, these people need our help, and I know my son can help them. Even though it could be a great risk and danger to him, I'm gonna let that go and let him, do what's right and help these people." That's a huge sacrifice for a mother. And he's her only kid, and he's only 9 years old, and she's gonna let him, maybe get run over and blown up for these people, which maybe that's reckless parenting, but it's also very, very nice it's a huge gesture, because nobody in the universe helps each other, as Anakin points out, and that's her. She taught him to do that, to help each other, help other people. So
such a good reminder of her role in all this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love that. I love seeing her role, because it seems really small. It's just such a quick thing, and then you move on. But it's like, wow, no, she's so instrumental here. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Grandma
It's interesting
Skywalker.
as a kid. It's true. It's interesting as a kid watching it. I remember her being in the movie a whole lot more than she is. Like, her presence was much bigger to me as a little kid in the movie. And as I watch it now, it's like, oh yeah, she's not in the movie all that much, but she left a big impression, at least on me as a kid. That I really felt it when he has to leave. It felt like a big deal. But
that's cool.
I don't
know. Yeah, that's great. See, it's that kind of stuff, man. So good. Yeah, and just the seeds of the light and the dark in Anakin.
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely.
so cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really isn't one or the other yet. Yeah, that's really neat. I'm just kind of flipping through here, and then Jar Jar.
Yeah, of course, Jar Jar's antics.
I never knew he said my tongue is fat. I just now learned that.
Yeah, I remember learning that too. It's like, oh, my tongue is fat. That's what he says. Okay. Yeah, it took me a while to realize that too.
Yeah, I never knew that. And I like this little line between C3PO and R2 here. It's just a nice nod. Like, George knows exactly what he's doing. He knows he's writing Jar Jar to be annoying. I mean, everyone. I don't know. My impression is most people think like, did George have any idea what he's doing? Yeah, of course he did. Look, Obi-Wan's annoyed with him. Qui-Gon's annoyed with him. C-3PO's annoyed with him. That's part of the story. Oh, I remember I was going to say back a few scenes. That reminded me. It's interesting with Qui-Gon here. He seems more open to Anakin and what the Force is going to do with him. Like we've talked about before, kind of that progression of Qui-Gon learning to appreciate the what do you want to call those people? The humble, the outcasts, the inconvenience.
The overlooked.
The way I mean, you see like the way he first treats Jar Jar, and then Padme, and now Anakin. I mean, you can see his small progression growing. He's being more and more open to these people. Where he's not so reluctant here of like, oh yeah, there's another slave kid, whatever. I'm not here to free slaves. I mean, he's not so hard-hearded.
Well, he doesn't acknowledge Anakin at all in the first scene. He meets him, he doesn't say anything to him. It's Padme who talks to Anakin.
Good call. Didn't catch that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but now Qui-Gon can't stop looking at Anakin. Now he's fascinated by him.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's fun to see. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the pod racer starting up in this scene? Anything we're missing here?
Yeah, but again, it just just that it sets up, how special Anakin is. Like, it just shows you. This just is showing off how everyone's against. Like, you never working on that thing for years. It's never gonna run, and he's got this huge race tomorrow. It's gonna kill him. Everyone's sure he's gonna die. There's no way he's gonna get out of this. But he's just like, yep, it'll work. And then it does work, and it's working. He's all excited, and it's it just I mean, the music is telling you what's happening too. Like, this is like this is special. This, like, you can see Qui-Gon kind of like, huh, that worked. You kind of see him just acknowledging, and Padme smiling too. It's like everyone just kind of realizing that there is something special to this kid. Like, that's like a 9-year-old building a race car by himself, and getting it to work. And it's every time they doubt him, he keeps proving them wrong. And it's just a seemingly small but also kind of a big victory for Anakin in this scene. And it endears us as an audience to him. So it's just a fun little scene. And of course there's and like the way it ends with a little bit of sadness, a little bit of worry from Shmi that, okay, cool, but you still haven't done the race yet, not out of the woods yet. So
yeah, I love that scene of her, just the way it's framed, like she's really far out, and it's kind of got that arc, it's looking through the arc, and it's all dark, and she's in the light just back there, like, here we go,
yeah, I know. Yeah, she's small in the frame, and yeah.
Yeah, and just seeing, I mean, that's just a good picture of her and her role in the galaxy. Such a small piece of light here, but she shapes the whole picture. Yeah, I think that's so cool.
Yeah, and that's something I was going to say earlier, I forgot, was that unlike a lot of other depictions in literature and mythology, but the virgin birth connection between Anakin and Jesus is that they both were humble beginnings, right? They weren't, it wasn't, kings or warriors that were born of a warrior queen or something. He's a slave in this, Jesus was born in a barn or a cave or whatever, and Anakin is a slave, and then it's this miraculous event that happens in a very unceremonious place or circumstance, or it goes unheralded, at least, it goes unheralded in an earthly way. But the heavens definitely heralded it with Jesus' case. But pointing out, there's just the small, she's just a slave woman. She's just she cleans electronic parts. I think I've written in the visual dictionary, I think that's her job, is she just cleans and refurbishes little parts of junk and trying to sell them or whatever. But so she's no one special, but she is exceptional mother. She's a great person. She gives Anakin the teaching and the parenting he needs to it turns him into the great kid he is here. And eventually, of course, all the good things he ever does in the movies are all tied back to her. So she has she's a small figure with a long shadow, a big influence for sure.
Yeah. Oh, don't underestimate your role, parents. Don't underestimate your role.
Yeah, exactly.
So big. Yeah,
totally.
So powerful. Yeah. I also really like, this is going back just a step, but I really just listened to you talk about that, just the overconfidence of Anakin again. It's like, wow, seeing him, not only does he have overconfidence, but he has it for a reason, like you said, he's successful at everything he does. And it's just interesting to see how in episode 2 and then episode 3, where he loses the two most important women in his life, like, it just adds so much more weight as to why that's so crippling to him. How he just can't, he's never really failed before.
Yeah, he sees it as his failure, even though he didn't really do anything to, he couldn't have saved his mom, and he couldn't, he in a weird way, brought about Padme's death. But you're right, yeah. He sees it as a failure, even though it has nothing to do with him.
Yeah, and that just hit me, like, wow, he really blames himself for that. And just now it just adds more depth to it, just realizing, like, here's a guy who's just kind of good at everything he does. He's never really failed. So now with his first failure being so traumatic with the woman in his life, it's like, oh, no wonder. Like, it's just such a big deal. I never really caught that as a kid. Just why, I mean, of course, losing your mom, big deal, but, and then of course blaming yourself, and those are very natural human things, but just seeing the weight of that as a kid who's never failed before, it's like, wow. And the reason why he's so quick to blame Obi-Wan, this is your fault, you're holding me back. Yeah, just seeing that, like, yeah. And it's not just like he's been good at whatever he does in little things. Like you said, there's a 9-year-old kid built a race car by himself, and wins. He's great. He's great at it. Like, wow, he's had big successes. So yeah, that was another mind blow moment. Blow up that
No,
Death
you're
Star,
right.
man.
Yeah, it's so true. And I loved. I realized it when I got to episode 2 when I was studying that. And what does he say after his mom dies at her funeral? He says, "I wasn't strong enough to save you, Mom." He's like, "And I promise I won't fail again." Again, he makes it something he did. I failed to save you. It's not that you died, and it's just how things go. Like you're gonna. He makes it all about him. It's like, no, this is something I need to be involved with. And again, with Padme, she doesn't even die, or she doesn't even. It's just a threat. She's doing fine. She's having a baby. She's not sick. It's not a hard pregnancy or anything. She's doing fine. So all this is just imagined in Anakin's brain. So he creates, and at that point, he's actually manufacturing the threat in his brain, in his mind, and he's the one to actually take steps to actually bring it about, unfortunately, which is the real tragedy of it. But yeah, it's just a great point you made that everything's going right for him. He just succeeds at everything, but first time he's robbed of anything, he sees it as his failure, not just the way of things. He just something that he needs to fix. It's a problem with me, or a problem with the world that I need to fix, rather than just being like, well, this is bigger than me. This is the world I live in. This is how things shape out or shape up. Wait, shake down. Like what's the phrase? This is how things.
I think you're right.
It's like
shape
5
up,
different.
right?
I don't know. This is how things go down. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember
Great
reading
point.
in the archive book that is the and we'll come to this obviously, but that's the moment Darth Vader's born. The seed of Darth Vader, George said, is like right there. That's when his mom dies, gives birth to Darth Vader, right there. And that's just so neat, where we finally see the scales tip, where he's sort of been like struggling with light and dark, because the tendencies are both there, and then we start to see him tip towards the dark side at that point. Yeah, really good stuff. Oh man, great. Well, let's get into this scene here, and then I should probably run after that. We'll set up the pod race. So we get our introduction to midichlorians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll let you start. Anything you want to comment on this scene here with Qui-Gon Anakin?
Yeah, there's so many great scenes packed into the middle of this movie here. There's so much character stuff here that's awesome. So, just again in the dialogue here, everyone, even George says he's not great at dialogue, but he does get some really good information. He gets some really good stuff out of there. He gets some good information out in the dialogue, some really, really juicy stuff here. So, Anakin, he dreams of freedom and exploring the universe. Again, he doesn't see himself as a slave. He doesn't act like one. He doesn't see himself as one. He finds little pieces of freedom wherever he can get it. Building C-3PO, the pod racing, or pod racing. Like he creates. He's control the pod race. Anything he can, exist in any kind of world where he doesn't have to be controlled or commanded to do anything and be oppressed, he'll find it. And of course, choosing to help others instead of being commanded to assist them. Like he's choosing to serve these people, and as opposed to, he's commanded, he's obligated to serve Watto. So he's a willing servant, despite the fact that he's already a slave. It's the fact that's the last thing you'd want to do as a slave is do anything for anybody else, right? Because that's what you do all day long. But the fact that he's this 9-year-old kid, he was doing all this, going through all this headache to help these strangers, essentially. It's just such a cool little character trait. What else? I guess 2 other things here. So his midichlorian count, we kind of already talked about all this, but his midichlorian count is off the chart. So there's, I always forget that it's got a really high midichlorian count. And I had to remind myself, we actually don't know what his midichlorian count is. Like it goes off the chart. So it could be 2 midichlorians higher than the top, or it could be a billion more. Who knows? And so there's quite literally no limit to his potential. So no Jedi's potential has ever come close. And again, he's the demigod, right? Like Hercules, he is the divine hero, immortal, but with the power of the gods. And like George said in that quote, touched by God, or in this case, little microscopic organisms. But, and then the last point is that, just to touch on Obi-Wan a bit, is that he is, again, kind of like Shmi, when I watched this movie again more recently and really looked at it and studied it, Obi-Wan's not really in the movie all that much, especially in this middle part. He really is in the background in a lot of his scenes in this movie. And And so what it kind of does, it's kind of cool. There's not much indication that he's going to be a key player in the rest of the movies. You're really set up to think that Qui-Gon is like the main Jedi character that we're going to follow as he trains Anakin. And so it really sets up this nice surprise when Qui-Gon dies and Obi-Wan has to take over the responsibility. At this point in the story, if we're going through it without knowing what's happening or what's going to happen, you don't really think much of Obi-Wan. You don't really think he's going to be this key player, but he is.
Yeah, boy, and I just love that picture so much because you really get to know who Obi-Wan is, through all that. He's stepping up to that role. Kind of didn't want to, but now is forced to. Yeah, I like that.
What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, just a couple thoughts, and this is all Nathan, not necessarily George stuff. But I like his ambition. I like Anakin's ambition. Like you say, just look into the stars. I want to see them all. I'm going to be the first guy. There's that confidence thing, but there's still a lot of hope in this kid. Yeah. And then just as a parent, I have to chuckle. With Shmi. This is such a mom moment. I'm not telling you again. Get ready for bed. Come on. Yeah. And again, just the more of the mystery. What's happening here? Who is this kid? What's going on? What is this midichlorian thing? What's it mean that he's got so high? Things like that. And then I love the just how the scene ends. Shmi overhears that conversation between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and she's just like, "Whew, I don't know what to make of that." And us as the audience, we don't know what to make of that either. Well, neither do Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Just stumbling upon this huge fact of who Anakin is. And it's like, well, nobody knows what to do with that. What does this mean? I don't know. Yeah. So not much depth there on my part, but I think it's just a neat scene. So,
and one thing I just was realizing as you're talking about that, I think we talked about earlier, as I was saying, I wonder where Qui-Gon kind of realizes what's up with Anakin. And I just remembered I read this scene in the screenplay earlier, and like most scenes, there's some dialogue here cut here and there, probably just for time to make the movie shorter. But Qui-Gon, here's I want an analysis of the blood sample I'm sending you. Qui-Gon says, "Wait a minute," and Qui-Gon says, "I need a midichlorian count." They did say a couple redundant things, and then Obi-Wan says, "The reading's off the chart, over 20,000," and then Qui-Gon says to himself, "That's it then." So it's like, oh, it's almost like he kind of realizes in that moment that, okay, so chosen one, maybe he kind of figures it out there. But later Obi-Wan says, even Master Yoda doesn't have a Jedi or have a midichlorian count that high. Qui-Gon says, no Jedi has. Obi-Wan, what does that mean? Qui-Gon, I'm not sure. So maybe when he says I'm not sure what it means, like, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the situation? But maybe Qui-Gon is kind of cemented in his brain at this point when he says, that's it then. When he hears that the midichlorians are off the chart, he's like, okay, this is starting to sound like the prophecy.
There's the kid.
I don't know. It's not explicitly stated here again. As always, none of what we're saying is, neither of us are George Lucas. So
yep.
Just saying, this is Josiah reading into it a bit, maybe going, okay, maybe this is where George is kind of indicating that Qui-Gon kind of turns the corner and goes, okay, this might be the chosen one. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah. And then we can end on this Darth Maul scene. I love this scene. I will never forget this. Maybe I mentioned this before, but the Sith infiltrator, his ship. I remember seeing that shot in the preview and just going, "It's a TIE fighter!" I remember being so excited. And I read this morning, that Doug Chang, the guy who designed it, said, I wanted to make his ship look like something between the Imperial shuttle and the Imperial TIE fighter. I was like, oh yeah, and he nailed it. So good. Yeah, it's so good. And I love how George does bad guys. I mean, he does them so well. And I think a big part of that is just silence, I mean, Boba Fett, Darth Maul, even Darth Vader to some extent, the Emperor, there's a lot of silence in his bad guys and his villains. And it's just so powerful. Yeah, I love that. It makes him so mysterious and so threatening and looming, just by this silent, Satan descending upon Tatooine, looking for these guys. It's so cool, sending out these probes and just letting the movie speak for it. The pictures, You don't need any words. I love that. I love how he does that. He's a master at that. So, yeah, man. What are your thoughts on Darth Maul's arrival?
I mean, yeah, as a kid, I loved Darth Maul. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and I don't know if I ever found him scary as a kid. I mean, I did. I knew he was powerful. I mean, it was kind of. I knew the threat of him was scary, but I always thought he was cool looking. I never always liked to look at him. He has what we call in the animation world appeal, which is not just means appeal doesn't mean something pretty to look at. It means that your eyes are drawn to it. So when you're in good animation and good character design, even a villain can have appeal, like Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty. That character design has great appeal because even though she's got these ugly horns and sharp edges, it's everything. The design is balanced. The color scheme, the way she moves, the way she animates it, your eyes are kind of just drawn to it. It's sort of like looking at a fire. When you're camping, everyone just stares at the campfire. Like we can't look away. It's sort of like that kind of thing where whatever you're looking at just kind of draws you in. You can't look away from it. And because it's very easy to do animation that's ugly, and have a character design that doesn't work, and you're just kind of like, oof, this is rough. I don't want to look at this. Even if it's like supposed to be a lovable character, like it could be the Care Bears cartoon or something. And if you don't get the character designs right, it can be rough to look at because you're dealing with very limited amount of information with animation. So it's just colors and lines. And so if you don't get that, if those aren't in the right place at the right time, if they're not moving in the correct way, it can be really hard to look at, be really kind of rough. And so something about Darth Maul's design just has great appeal in that sense where you just can't look away from him. He just demands your attention. And so yeah, it is a great design. And I think I want to say it was, who was it? I think it's Ian McCaig, who's the guy who designed it. Oh, if I'm right, I think that's right. Anyway, but yeah, it's a good point you bring up about the silence of the villains, because I remember reading comics as a kid, Star Wars comics with Darth Vader in them, and remember just feeling it was weird because Vader is such a chatterbox in the comics. You can't shut him up. He's just always talking, and I always thought, this doesn't feel like Vader. Now, to be fair, comics are much more wordy than film because you can tell things with movement in film, and you can't do that to the same extent in comics. But yeah, it is a good point that sometimes the silent villains are just, they're not showing all their cards. They're hiding stuff. They're makes them mysterious, and so that's a really good point. But in terms of this, just the scene though, I love that. At the worst possible moment, the Sith show up. Like we're so close, but now things are made 10 times worse now because now Maul is he's here. It's like, is he gonna find them before they can escape Tatooine? Like, is the pod race gonna happen? Is he gonna catch up to them before it happens in the middle of the race? It's just the stakes have all of a sudden elevated. And that's what every time we cut to the villains, that's the plot device that they serve, right? It's just to increase the tension, remind the audience of the stakes, and so now, the Sith is on the planet that our heroes are on. So like, it just ramps up the tension. So I just, it's so classic. Will our heroes, escape before Maul can find them? Tune in next week, kind of thing. It's such a classic sort of adventure kind of scenario. Are they going to be able to escape Tatooine before Maul catches up with them? And it's just a cool scene because the hunt has begun. He sent out his dogs to sniff the scent. That's what the probe droids are. So it's such a fun. Like, oh no, it makes it all tension. The tension is cool.
Oh, that's so cool. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I guess the last thing I'll say is there is a deleted scene that happens for the next real scene. And it's very short, so I'll just bring it up real quick here at the end. But so it's a deleted scene. I think there's footage of it. Yeah, I think there is. It's where it's the next morning. So Padme wakes up Anakin. He's like sleeping outside by his pod racer, and she wakes him up. And he had a dream of her leading troops into battle. And he tells her, and so it's not the last time he'll have a dream about her that will come true. But that's just interesting because that would have been the first time Anakin had like a vision of Padme in a dream. But so again, he sees things before they happen. That's it's building on that theme. So that's just cool. I like that deleted scene. And then, but in that scene, she outright says she hates fighting. And so her pacifist nature is very much spelled out in that scene. So that might be one of the reasons why they deleted it. It was a little too on the nose maybe, but I just like that because it just hammers home some of the points that we've been dealing with so far, and it plants seeds for later on in the movie. But it was just a fun little deleted scene. And it also establishes their relationship, her waking him up and like, come on, Anakin, time to get. It's just they're they're at this point just friendly bond, but eventually they're they're going to be married. So
That's cool. That would have added a lot, I feel like, especially to her character.
Yeah, her arc is a little more spelled out there.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. Huh. The only other thought I was going to say, as going back to Darth Maul a little bit, that we've never seen him take his hood off yet.
True.
And we won't see that until the duel, right? Because I don't think his hood ever comes off until that point.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right? When he pulls back the hood. Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
That's a good point.
You made me think about that with his aesthetic and just the way he draws in, and then we don't even know he has horns yet.
Yeah.
It's
true.
Yeah.
Well, that plays into the idea of, remember when the Jedi took their hoods off, it's like, oh, it's revealed, oh, friendly, humans, oh, cool, they look like my uncle, or actually they're happy, they're friendly. Then when the Sith takes his hood off, there's devil horns underneath it. It's like, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, the hood stays on. It's like when the hood is taken off, what is revealed underneath tells you a lot about, like, oh, clearly this is the bad guy. Clearly this is danger. Clearly this is a bad news for. Well, it is bad news for Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, that's interesting. I've never really thought about the hood playing such an important role, just throughout Star Wars. And, you think about it with the Empire or the Emperor, we never, yeah, we've talked about that a little bit, but we'll come to it more.
That's true, because, that's a good point. Yeah. Sidious is the reverse, or Palpatine's kind of like the reverse of that, where he puts the hood on and he never takes it off after that. Like, he's like, I'm now permanently, insidious. I'm permanently working in I'm forever in the shadows after that. That's a really great point. I never thought about that, because I always thought about the Jedi taking it off. Of course, I never thought about Darth Maul either. That's a great point, dude. Wow, yeah, that's cool. Well, inverse, even though Sidious starts out with the hood on, but yeah, tells you about Palpatine. Yeah, that's cool.
It's really jarring when he puts his hood on, and you just kind of, I don't know, it just feels like, whoa, there he is. Wow, okay, we just saw the transformation.
Yeah,
right there, and then, yep, true colors.
Yeah, that's a cool moment.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the power of a hood, right? Yeah, and then Luke, we'll talk about that later. Return of the Jedi, he walks in with his hood on. So yeah, that's just really cool. I've never really thought about that before. Just think about that. So yeah.
That's it for this episode. Join us in the next one as we continue our series on the Phantom Menace. As always, thanks for listening, and on to the next one.